Okay, so the kind of themes throughout what I'm saying today are social justice, climate emergency, biodiversity emergency, and that runs through everything that I'll be saying. So we'll start a bit about who owns the land and how that came about. So if we go back to the 1790s, there was a lot of common land in England, and Parliament at that time was full of the aristocracy, and there was a whole series of individual enclosure acts running for about 30 years, which carved up all the common land in England between those aristocrats who were in Parliament. Those were the enclosure acts. So in Sheffield, for those of you from local area, we had, in 1791 I think it was, we had an enclosure act in the parish of Ecclesall, which at that time was deemed moorland or wasteland, and most of it ended up as in the ownership of the lord of the manor, who was Earl Fitzwilliam. Now that land ownership pattern has kind of remained in place over those 200 years. In the 1790s, one of the biggest landowners in the country was the Duke of Rutland, who owns this moor today. Earl Fitzwilliam's family own the adjacent moor at Strines. It's called Bradfield Moors. So that land ownership pattern has continued, and basically I would say all that land was robbed from the people. About time we had it back in some way. So in Scotland they are very well advanced, talking about land reform, land ownership, and they have various opportunities there where the public can come together, communities can come together and buy pieces of land like this. So the conversation is going on there. We're not getting that conversation in England, and we need to have that. This bit of land is too important to be in the hands of one person who is misusing it. Right, so we need land reform. Now, we've heard one of the things that's really pleased me today, with everything I've heard, apart from chatting to a lot of very friendly, like-minded people, which is just brilliant, is that all the major points I was going to speak about, pretty much they've all been said already. So we are getting a big kind of group of people who know a lot about the importance of this land and why it needs to be managed differently. So that's fantastic, thank you. So we're standing in a conservation area, but each one of these conservation units around here, pretty much all of them have an unfavourable status, an unfavourable condition. And that's the reason for that is that they're not in their natural state. The natural state of this moorland, how all this peat was formed, is that these moors were extremely wet. Almost all that moorland we've walked past to get here is extremely dry. The reason for that is 200 years of grouse moor management. After those enclosure acts finished, then that was the period of time when grouse shooting really got going, 1820s, 1830s. So this land went from being common land with some common rights to get off my land and trespassing. So, in terms of the importance of this, we've heard about carbon from Minesh. So, when the peat moorlands are in extremely dry condition like this, then that peat oxidises and you get CO2 emitted into the atmosphere. If the moors are very wet, then you tend to have a much more varied habitat, so that's good for biodiversity. A lot of sphagnum moss, I can show you some examples of that around the back of the building there if anybody's interested, and that's one of the key sort of components that's necessary for storing carbon on these moors. Just making sure that carbon is not emitted but also storing more carbon here, which is what we need. So the other important things about the kind of the ecological disaster that we have around here, the grouse moor management, is that all those burnt areas you've seen contribute to an increased flood risk, because water pours very quickly off those burnt areas instead of being slowed down by this dense varied vegetation and lots of sphagnum moss. So rainwater. When we have a lot of runoff of the water off these moors, then it takes a lot of peat with it, so that discolours the water, and our water companies put lots of chemicals into that water to filter out that peat which is held in our water supplies. So a lot of chemicals go into it, and that's very expensive. That puts up our water rates. And finally, we've heard something about air quality. So yeah, we've heard about the effects of the Moorland burning, how Sheffield was hugely affected last October. All the air quality monitoring units there were way off the scale, very damaging air pollution for that day, and basically nothing has been done about that, and there's nothing to stop it happening again.
Except us.
Except us, right, yeah. So, yeah, another thing that was mentioned was our new government, our Labour government. So they promised a complete ban on moorland burning. Hearing Olivia Blake speak last week at the Hen Harrier Day, that sounded like something of an aspiration for over the next 5 years. So I think it needs to happen immediately before the burning season starts on the 1st of October. So we've got very little time to let our MPs know that we would like that burning to stop. There's already a ban on moorland burning where the peat depth is more than 40 centimetres. That was a result of a very long campaign from the RSPB, who basically took the UK government to the European Court when we were part of the EU. And even after we left the EU, the damage caused by burning on that deep peat is so obvious that the government had to ban it. So if you go around this moor, you would need some kind of measuring stick to see where they can burn and where they can't burn. Unfortunately, the bit that they chose to burn in October is quite shallow peat there, and that's why we suffered the effects of that. The other thing the Labour government has promised to do is to bring in a ban on snares. And we need to be contacting our MPs to make sure, lobbying government ministers to make sure that ban takes place immediately, because snares are out all year round and animals suffer in those snares. So part of the grouse moor management then, part of the whole sort of rationale about it, is to change what was once this very wet, biodiverse area into something where lots of heather grows, and so you'd get lots of grouse because grouse eat those heather plants. On top of that kind of wholesale change in the landscape here and right through the Pennines, the other major tool that's used to ensure lots of grouse is what they call predator control, where basically everything that might harm a grouse is killed. And there's very well documented examples of birds of prey being killed relentlessly. Perhaps we heard last week at Hen Harrier Day that the most persecuted bird of prey is the hen harrier, and most of those are killed in and around grouse moors, and they've been killed almost to extinction. So that's the kind of management that we see in these areas. Now, very disappointingly, the new DEFRA Secretary of State, the new Labour DEFRA Secretary of State, said a few months ago that he was in favour of sustainable shooting. Now, the things that I've just outlined to you, they don't sound very sustainable to me. They are hugely damaging to our communities. They're hugely damaging to the planet. So we need to tell our MPs, we need to tell DEFRA, we need to tell the government that grouse shooting needs to come to an end. And the way that we can do that is by pointing out all the things that are wrong with it. Now, there are some barriers to that. Most specifically, the grouse moor owners have huge influence, and that, I think, has shaped some of the new government policies that we've got. The government was talking, as a shadow government, was talking quite radically about what might happen. All that's been watered down now. You can see that very clearly when we talk about the right to roam. Labour didn't want to lose the rural vote, so all of a sudden, instead of going from complete right to roam over the whole country, it's going to be some mishmash of a few more tiny pockets of land where people can go. So there's a huge job of lobbying our MPs, lobbying our government. So that influence that the landowners have, that kind of one of the things that makes it very difficult to deal with is that extends into our police forces. So those of you who've heard me speak at these gatherings in the last 5 years, you'll have heard about some of the legal action I'm involved in where gamekeepers have made malicious accusations against me, and the police have kind of joined in that, apparently. And so I have, had to hire a lawyer, and there's a couple of cases which are with the Independent Office for Police Conduct at the moment. These things take years, and I think they hope that we'll all die of old age before they're even resolved. So they say that harassment and abuse always escalates. Just recently, I was stopped by an unmarked police car and I was accused of ATM theft and robbery, based on, again, what is very clear to me is a fabricated report. So yeah, quite an escalation that from a bit of fairly minor damage or whatever to, again, which was baseless, to being involved in violent crime. So I've started the kind of legal process with that. Professional standards are looking at that, and it will take a long time to resolve. But I think we need to ask kind of how does that kind of systemic misuse of power come about? Well, it comes about because we're not all equal under the law. Those people who own lots of land are treated very differently to the rest of us. And that leads to a sense of entitlement and also, I think, a sense of being above the law. So the police we have, some of them are definitely involved in shooting themselves, and they facilitate that. So we're up against quite a lot there, really, and I think it's something that we all have to kind of battle against, and we need to be brave, and we need to stand up to those people who are abusing the system in that way. So the basic thing, why do grouse moor owners and the police go to such lengths? Well, I mean, first of all, I'd say that it's clear criminality because making a false report is called wasting police time, which is a criminal offence. If it goes a bit further than that, then you're talking about perverting the course of justice, very serious offence there. So why do they do that? Well, they don't want us to know the truth. They don't want us to know the truth about the thousands of animals and birds which are tortured and killed on these moors. They don't want us to know the truth about the ecological disaster that these moorlands are. And they don't want us to know the truth about the way that we subsidise that. Because these conservation sites, very large areas like this moorland here, they attract huge agricultural payments through that scheme, which is going to be replaced, but basically we're going to end up with the same level of payments for these areas. And the Mosca estate where we're standing now gets something like £200,000 a year. So it doesn't really matter if they don't shoot any grouse here. If it's a bad year, they earn huge amounts of money, and that props up this rotten regime. So we need to tell our MPs, we need to tell the government that grouse shooting is not sustainable. We need to tell those people that it's rotten to the core and grouse shooting needs to be banned. Thank you.